Welcome to another edition of Drugs, Crime, and Politics. I'm your host, Buford Terrell, and with me tonight, it looks like we have the usual gang of suspects. Bandu there in the center, and Clayton Jones.
Hello.
Good to be together again tonight.
Very good.
There's several things. I think I'll start out mentioning something, and then I really want to go to a little story that Clayton's got. I suspect, like most people these days, one of the things I check on almost every day is the price of gasoline. And I'm wondering why recently we haven't heard more from our hempy friends. I mean, both the plant itself as a source of biofuel ethanol and hemp seed as a prime source for biodiesel. It looks to me like this is the time to be hitting that issue hard, yet I haven't heard much from anybody about it.
I haven't heard anything anywhere.
Other than farmers, are there any large hemp associations? There's so many for medical marijuana.
Not really. I mean, some of the health food store chains have a small organization. I believe there's a small group of hemp clothing retailers, and even the farmers are only organized in localities. So
right.
One of the Dakotas got its state law changed a few years back. Looks like, I believe it's Vermont will probably pass an agricultural hemp law this year.
What's the update on what Kentucky had going there?
I haven't heard anything new on Kentucky and hemp for a year or so.
Okay.
But I think it's time that maybe this branch of the marijuana crowd needs to be stirred up a little bit.
It's perfect. I mean, we're hurting the food industry with using corn to make biofuel. There's thousands of acres that's not being used.
And the other side that no one seems to go into is that corn is an extremely energy-intensive crop to grow. I mean, growing corn to make ethanol burns up uncounted amounts of diesels in fuel preparation and things like that, irrigation pumping. It uses up tons of other petrochemicals in fertilizer and stuff like this. So with corn-based or grain-based ethanol, it really looks like we're chasing the wrong dog here.
I mean, using hemp, it generates its own heat to distill it.
Yeah.
None of the plant is wasted.
Yeah.
It's much more prolific than trying to grow corn as well. It's essentially a
Yeah, in fact, if you ask the feds in, say, Missouri, it's practically impossible to keep it from growing.
Right.
I mean, they're still fighting wild ditchweed left over from the Hemp Through Victory program in the 1940s.
Right. I mean, even several months ago, there was a statistic that came out that was kind of mind-boggling that hemp or weed, they're obviously two different plants, the same strain, are grown differently.
Now, this is something that I really fight with the hemp people.
I think we all understand what we're talking about.
The hemp plant and marijuana are exactly the same biological species. Now, hemp cultivars are selected to have an extremely low THC content as compared to marijuana cultivars, which are the richer part of the same plant in THC.
So the difference is with hemp you use the stalks and it is grown differently. It's of course the same thing. It's grown differently in order that you can get a more fibrous stalk, whereas the actual marijuana plant is grown so that the buds are produced. It's a shorter, bushier plant, and you don't get that tough, fibrous stalk.
Right.
But my point is that there are so many other countries that are benefiting off of that. And in fact, it's not illegal to import, I don't know how many millions of dollars the hemp industry is in just the U.S. alone.
Yeah. Well, of course, if you go to your local health food store, you'll find hemp oil-based cosmetics. You'll find hemp oil-based salad dressings and things like that. You'll find hemp seed preparations. If you go to any trendy parts of almost any city in the country, I'm sure you'll find at least one retail establishment specializing in hemp clothing.
Like my salon I just went to, they use a hemp-based hair product.
Okay.
And they swear that it works better than anything else. Yeah.
So I guess maybe we need to prod Willie Nelson a little and get the biodiesel bus rolling again.
Get that thing rolling again.
You were telling us a rather disgusting story out of California.
A very, very disturbing story. A young man out there in St. Louis Obispo, his name was Owen, 17 years old. Played football, played soccer, getting ready to graduate high school to go to college, and found out that he had a tumor in his leg, in the bone.
Right.
And he had bone cancer. Went to Stanford University, the best that they have in that area. And the doctors out there gave him a prescription for medical marijuana because it's statewide legal.
Yes.
With a state permit.
Yes.
And this young man was going to this dispensary that just opened there. And the man's name that owned the dispensary is Charles Lynch. And he has been charged, and the charges have been upgraded because he was selling marijuana to a minor. His parents were outraged. They have nowhere to go for the kid to have the medicine he needs. Takes care of his phantom pains. It was taking care of his ability not to be able to hold anything down.
Right, the anti-nausea effect,
And from his chemo, he had a lot of sores in his mouth, and I can remember that myself.
Okay.
And he was using cannabis, and he was gaining his weight back, and he was getting away from his phantom pains, and federal DEA was invited in by the sheriff. And the sheriff, it's a low priority call, so his police department had no real ability to go raid the dispensary.
Now, under California state law, both the recommendation by the doctor and the dispensing by the dispensary and the medical use by the 17-year-old would all be legal under California law. And the sheriff, as a local governmental official, is a creature of and obedient to the state law. So what you're telling us is that to get around his own law and to keep from obeying the law that controls his job, he slipped around the back door and invited the feds to come in?
Yes.
Okay.
They came in, they raided the dispensary, took all the medicine, took all the cash, everything he had there, went to his home, cleaned that out also, all by invitation of the sheriff. Some people just will never learn.
And what did you say about the possible sentence that this dispenser is facing?
This man, if he's convicted in federal court of the charges that are against him, he will be sentenced to at least 100 years in federal prison. A murderer in federal jail is 20 years. But here he is helping a young man that was sick, dying of cancer, and he's going to go to prison for the rest of his life.
And just part of the irony of it, we might point out that possibly one of the most famous cases of the medical use of cannabis was when Dr. Grinspoon of Harvard Medical School's son was receiving chemotherapy for cancer, and Greenspoon provided cannabis to him. That boy was 8 years old at the time. So,
I think it's notable that Dr. Greenspoon was a Harvard researcher or professor?
Yes, professor, yes, on the medical school faculty, And he has since become one of the leading advocates for medical marijuana.
The science is there.
The science is not only there, the research has been done, but I work in the Texas Medical Center, and I was perusing through this section, the oncology section. I picked up, it's a physician's handbook and reference guide for oncologists, cancer physicians. And there was an entire section devoted to tetrahydrocannabinol in the oncologist's handbook. And touting its antiemetic effects, that it should be used for anti-nausea and chemotherapy. And it was astounding to me that this published reference that is specifically for oncologists is saying that, yes, this is beneficial, it has been proven, it's probably, one of the most effective. And yet legislators and other people can't understand that.
To me, it's a mark of shame on MD Anderson and Sloan Kettering that these places, our leading research institutions on cancer, have not already built their own greenhouses and rebelled against the federal government because of their obligation to provide the best medicine to their patients. It's time for the doctors to put their own lives on the line.
But they're afraid.
I know, and I think also
get an extra 15 years of college to be made a martyr and put in jail.
I know. And if I were in their situation, I don't think I would do any differently. But I will tell you this. If MD Anderson, one of the leading cancer institutions in the world, a branch of the University of Texas, were to come out publicly and say, our patients need marijuana. It's one of the most effective therapies we've got for A, B, and C. Do you realize what kind of effect that would have on Congress?
Well, here's my question to you. Who do you think is funding all those researchers in MD Anderson and UT Houston? It's absolutely true. It's an unfortunate reality that it's all NIH funding, it's all NIDA funding. I had the opportunity to speak to a couple of people.
When it's not pharmacological funding.
It's not Pfizer, it's not Merck, it's not anything like that. But the government will yank that money right away just as soon as they tout medical marijuana. As far as any type of funding they're doing.
My own view is
two
that
examples.
NIH would not dare jerk every grant from MD Anderson.
Well, you'd have to have a unanimous MD Anderson. Okay, so hypothetically, that would be the most fantastic situation. I've had the opportunity to speak to, and I will never remember his name, but he's based out of Dallas, has done anandamide research before it was actually able to be prescribed. And we had him speak at our school on behalf of Students for Sensible Drug Policy. And he was NIH and NIDA funded, National Institute for Drug Abuse. He could only speak in a non-biased way on the benefits that they were seeing from anandamide use. And I was like, can I ask, in your opinion, what do you think is the proposed uses for anandamide? How do you think it will have an impact on society? He was like, I can't say anything about that. Another example is, and not all hope is lost for MD Anderson, because I wanted to get a representative of MD Anderson out here to speak. And they have, press kind of people there. Their pain wellness center. And this is, I think we've discussed this before, one of the major physicians was a huge proponent for medical marijuana and would oftentimes discuss it and I guess recommend it for his patients. And unfortunately it's not like
one of the things that has struck me over the past 5 or 6 years at least is that practicing pain doctors, those who specialize in severe and intractable pain, have really been willing to step up to the plate, make sure that opioids are available to their patient in large quantities, And quite frankly, several of them have been taken to court and tried on criminal charges for doing it. But they have been much, much braver and more resolute in favor of their patients than any of the cancer doctors I've heard of. And I hope a couple are listening, and I hope it makes you feel a little bit ashamed.
I think it's unfortunate that still at this time there's not a lot known about. There's only just now in medical schools are they having sections where you have to understand pain and pain management. Things like that.
That dates back to the 1920s. And it springs out of the early efforts to suppress the use of opioids. At that time, primarily morphine and heroin. And under the federal government pressures, by about 1925, the medical schools removed the teaching of the use of opioids from their curricula. And it was not until a few doctors started their own research programs in the 1970s, leading to, for instance, the Texas Intractable Pain Act in the 1980s, that the medical schools started to look at this again. I mean, I hate to say this, having been an academic my whole life, but in some ways, academic institutions are extremely conservative and extremely lazy. We don't do new things easily. I understand it's time for us to take the first break, so we'll be back in just a minute or two.
What did you say that was the intro?
My name is Michael Aldrich. I've been in the marijuana movement since 1966. And at this conference today, which is called Cannabis Reentering Mainstream Medicine, I was thinking back to the early 60s, and two very important things happened in 1964 that are having an effect on us right now. The first one was that the first legalized marijuana group in the world started in 1964. A young man named Lowell Eggemeyer walked into a San Francisco police station and whipped out a joint and fired it up in front of the desk sergeant and said that he didn't think that marijuana should be illegal. And so the desk sergeant busted him and put him in jail, and I don't know what the outcome was. I think he served a short sentence in prison and was released and never heard of again. But to that one act of civil disobedience, we owe the whole modern medical marijuana movement, including the movement to legalize all aspects of marijuana use. The other thing that happened in 1964 that's having a really important effect on this year was that Downey and Meshulam discovered isolated and discovered the synthesis of the THC molecule and started the whole modern pattern of research, which is to investigate the chemical properties of the various cannabinoids and to find out which of those chemical properties translates into good medical effects for various medical conditions. And so here we are, many, many years later, like 45 years later, talking about entering mainstream medicine. And what was happening in the ensuing period, I think, was simply a paradigm shift. A shift from the old concept of marijuana being a killer weed in violence, insanity, and death, to the new and more modern concept of this herb has benefits for all kinds of uses, whether it's recreational, social, or medical, or religious, or in terms of the industrial uses of hemp, there are many, many of those as well. So this is a multi-use plant which is finally in the 21st century coming into its own in a way that we started fighting for in the 20th century. I think the most important shift, of course, is the scientific basis of research. Now that we know that there is an endocannabinoid system operating in every human body on the planet, we are able to better understand what's going on with the actual pharmacokinetics, the actual reactions of this drug in various parts of our body that is mediating and helping to modulate a whole bunch of different bodily systems. And that is a paradigm shift from thinking that marijuana is simply the stuff that hippies smoke while they're at protest marches, as it was in the 60s. So in my own lifetime, I have been very fortunate to see a translation from what was once really good 19th century medicine to what became very bad 20th century medicine in dropping marijuana out of the pharmacopoeia at all. And finally, in the 21st century, marijuana medicine coming into its own on a profound biological, even microbiological basis. And I think what that means for the future is that this conference is the type of a professional conference that will be happening a lot in the future, only there will be specific conferences about the medical value of cannabis and cannabis products in, for instance, treating AIDS patients or treating cancer patients. Or, what's even more important, is treating patients for diseases that haven't even come into epidemic proportions yet. When AIDS hit, it was a totally new shock, and we still haven't discovered how to cure that virus. What we have discovered, though, is that this very old-fashioned herb works really well for helping people to be able to take their AIDS treatment drugs, for helping people to be able to take their cancer treatments, and for generally keeping the body in balance while these various attacks of diseases as well as treatments are going on within your own body. So I think that what's going to happen in this century with cannabis is a total paradigm shift, that we are going to suddenly start regarding cannabis, as many of the patients do now. We're going to regard cannabis as a real drug that has potential in so many different fields. And I think that what we'll see at the end of this century is not only the full availability of the plant, perhaps used ritually or sacramentally by that time, but also dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of different chemical compounds and compound drugs that are made from cannabinoids. And I think that we will have applications for diseases and medical conditions that we don't even exist right now, that we don't know anything about right now, and I will bet you my bottom dollar that marijuana will be helpful with those too.
Thank you very much, sir.
We're back, and I want to remind everyone that the phone lines are alive if you're watching us on Wednesday night. So if you have questions or comments, please phone in, and I'm sure that Steve will get the number up on the screen as soon as possible. So what else is new that we need to talk about? You've got some legislative matters?
Oh, yeah, we've got some great legislative news. MPP is at it again. That's Marijuana Policy Project.
Yeah.
And Maurice Hinchey, of course, the proponent for medical marijuana.
No, he's a representative from California, is that correct?
Yes.
I don't know why I said, but yeah, he's a representative in California. Maurice Hinchey, he has perennially sponsored the Hinchey-Rohrabacher Amendment, which would protect medical marijuana patients, in states that have provided sanctions for those who have a doctor's recommendation. Another amendment, that's an amendment to the Commerce, Justice, Science Appropriations Bill. So he has introduced another amendment to this bill this year, and this will protect from prosecution terminally ill people who use medical marijuana with a doctor's recommendation. Now, at first glance, this looks and sounds exactly like the Hinchey-Rohrabacher Amendment again, but the big difference is that, first of all, it's for those who are terminally ill. It will protect them. And secondly, it's not just limited to the 12 medical marijuana states. So,
well, it's got other problems as well.
It's very narrow in scope.
The limited to the terminally ill excludes large numbers of patients, and limiting it only to protection for the patient using it still ducks the real big issue, which is growing it and getting it to them.
Right. Well, I guess in those states that have the medical marijuana, the growing industry and dispensing isn't the problem. But I'm wondering, how are they going to, well, it's not, as long as they've got it, that's not where their problem lies. But I'm wondering how they're going to define terminally ill
Yeah.
in that type of prospect, because someone who may have cancer may go into remission, they may be out of remission. How are you going to define that? So that's kind of a big thing. It is, I feel that it will get a little bit more support since it is a little bit narrower than the Rohrabacher, but I feel like they are going to get a little bit caught up when they come to the states that don't have medical marijuana provisions. So it's good to keep an eye on that. You can send a pre-written letter to your representative from mpp.org. Always a personalized letter, a personalized phone call is the best way. So, but keep that in mind, and we'll be seeing more of that in the upcoming months.
Well, when I first got fairly active in reform issues about 10 years ago, I was wildly optimistic and said I thought marijuana would be legal in 5 years. I missed my time slot pretty badly. But I've got to confess that this year in particular, I'm feeling an even stronger surge of optimism. My own feeling is we're going to see some major movements within the federal Congress within the next 18 months. So do either of you have any opinions on what you think is likely?
Now, Obama has said that if he does win, that he is going to propose legislation for similar laws for allow other states to have laws for doctor-assisted suicide. I don't like using that word, but that's he's going to propose federal legislation that allow other states other than Oregon to do it. He also said that he is going to propose legislation to allow all states to have medical marijuana. In that interview that I watched on this, he said that the age of people are changing and people's knowledge is more advanced than the older folks, and that we're just... he's going to try to make some good changes, I hope. And yes, I do think he will do some good. I do think that we will all be seeing the ability to have medical marijuana within the next couple of years.
Also, I think some of the already announced resignations from Congress have included some of the more adamant drug warriors.
Right. It's even, speaking of former drug warriors, it's interesting to see Bob Barr. I'm still a little bit astounded by that. But
is that a flip-flop?
That's a big old flip-flop.
That's more than a flip-flop.
Is it a wolf in sheep's clothing? I don't know. But I think the apt word here is change, I guess, to throw around a very thrown around word. But Obama, I don't know that I haven't heard that he had said he would propose legislation, but he has definitely in the debate said that he would support no federal funding for
the remarkable thing about that is that everything that happens in the presidential campaign is examined under microscopes, and this has raised no sort of reaction or comment or resistance anywhere.
Its time is coming.
It's interesting. You read even reports on how we have economic distress and duress to our money going to the war and food and et cetera, et cetera. And one of the reasons this, I think it's Eric Alterman listed, was because we have a failing drug policy system that feeds money into the system for absolutely no reason. So when you start reading these articles and editorials that have absolutely nothing to do with the war on drugs, and yet mention it as if it's an obvious fact that it's failing and everybody knows and it should be kicked out the door, I think that's pretty heartening, definitely.
I saw one story in a paper this week talking about a state's school budgets and the problem with school finance. And the article just casually mentioned, on the other hand, we're spending X dollars more on more prisons. Didn't anyone ever say something about an ounce of prevention being worth a pound of cure? And then this went on from there.
Yeah, exactly. I think people are starting to lighten up, too.
Yeah.
Well, it's time that we legalize it, tax it, educate people, and regulate how we can dispense it.
Yeah. Well,
And going back to California last year, they paid $100 million in sales tax.
Yeah.
Last year, the marijuana community, whether it was advertising in the newspaper, whatever it was, all the taxes from marijuana money went to $100 million. And yes, that's going to get driven way down when all the states have it, and it becomes a natural commodity.
Natural commodity. But the other side of that is, I've seen nothing at all anywhere that has indicated that recreational use or use by minors in California has gone up at all.
No, it's gone down, as a matter of fact.
Gone down. Statistics have shown after Prop 250.
We have a
caller. It looks like we have a caller. So, hi. Welcome to Drugs, Crime, and Politics.
Thank you. Back on to hemp oil.
Yes.
So I do miss the garb oil guy. I'm starting to hear a lot of, half-baked energy ideas. How about some fully baked ones? I think it's really time to start thinking outside the box, or the SUV, if you will. One thing that really kind of saddens me is over the past 7 years, we failed to redesign commercial flights from tip to tail.
Yeah.
And now we're going to pay for it, even though we've already maxed out the subsidy.
Okay, thank you. That I've been thinking a lot about energy policy lately, and I think one of the things that has gotten to me as much as anything was a set of articles in Scientific American several months ago pointing out that a very small fraction of available solar energy could totally replace all of our oil use. But the point, I think, one of the things I've thought about it, I could figure out how to replace oil-based fuels in virtually every use we have in this country except for airplanes. As far as I know, no one since those disasters in the early 1950s working on nuclear-powered planes, no one has done any research at all on finding an alternative airplane fuel. And right now, that's the core of our transportation system. Now, I guess you could make hemp-based diesel for avgas, but
I don't know if that could be made.
Sure. Yeah.
It looks like we've got Dean on the phone. Let's see if we can. Hi, Dean. Are you there?
Hi, I'm here. Hi. Good to talk to you guys again. I wanted to chime in a couple of points you've been talking about.
Okay.
And first up, Bindu, that oncologist reference manual you're talking about, get us a copy of the data, reference the page, and
definitely. I need to find that again.
Publication date.
Right.
I think that would be very useful.
Yes,
sure.
Next time I talk to a politician, I'd like to talk about that.
Okay.
Great idea.
I wanted to let folks know that I produce 9 radio shows each week for the Drug Truth Network. We're based at KPFT Houston.
Are you telling us
90.1 FM here in town. Just today we had Mr. Ray Hill. He's the patriarch of the station. Been producing the prison show for 28 years. And we talked about and drew comparisons between the war on gays and the war on drug users. And there are many parallels. I'll just reference a couple. One, they can kick in your door. They can take your kids. They can deny you professional licensing. They can arrest you and so forth. Well, the gays stood up for themselves. They decided that they weren't going to take it anymore, and they took things to the logical conclusion, and things have definitely changed in that aspect. Now, yesterday we had 7 patients from around North America, medical marijuana patients who had various maladies, and we talked about them about the physical symptoms. What does it do for you? Does it inebriate you? Does it incapacitate you? What does it do? And they all had very positive things to say about their use. We had patients from Texas, Washington State, Oregon, and up into Ontario. And again, those shows are both already online at drugtruth.net. Last week we had Gary Blankenship, president of the Houston Police Officers Union, and we talked about the situation here in town. He was a lot more of a drug warrior than were either of the district attorney candidates.
Yeah.
But we did make a little progress and had a great discussion after the show where, truthfully, I educated the man a little bit about the origins of this drug war and some of the ramifications. I wanted to also make mention of the fact that I get several calls each year from doctors, oncologists most likely. Well, actually, I'll say I get calls from their patients who tell me their doctors have recommended that they get some marijuana, and they get in touch with me, and we cautiously go about helping them. You know, the people in California are kind of following in that same route I was talking about the gays had taken. They have decided they're not going to take the BS from the federal government. There are 12 or so states that have medical laws, but the people in California are pretty much standing in unison telling the feds to get out. There are, I think, the majority of the listeners, viewers out there who are in agreement with the fact that medical marijuana laws are valid, that people that need it should have the right to clean, pure medicine, regulated, as place it, taxed and controlled.
Yeah.
And we all need to stand up. We all need to be citizens. We need to do our part and get in touch with these politicians and tell them it's all right to change their minds. Once again, I urge folks to tune into my shows. They're on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, 11:30 to noon, Century of Lies and Cultural Baggage. And each afternoon at 4:20 p.m., you can hear the 420 Drug War News. And that's all at 90.1 FM. Hundreds of my shows are available at drugtruth.net. And once again, I thank you all for this opportunity to talk with your viewers.
Okay, thank you, Dean. I wanted to follow up on one thing. When he was talking about the people of California acting as if they just weren't going to stand for it anymore. We all go around as if we're afraid of the federal government and the DEA. In point of fact, the DEA is a little bitty federal agency. They never, until California came along with medical marijuana, bothered with enforcing marijuana laws at all. They focused on cocaine and heroin. And frankly, the DEA has neither the manpower nor the budget to take over marijuana law enforcement across the country. So the more and more the states are saying, hell no, it's your job, we're not going to do it for you, the more trouble DEA will have in pushing its agenda.
It looks like we've got a caller. Hi, welcome to Drugs, Crime, and Politics.
Yeah, I have two quick questions.
Okay.
When a drug deal is being made, speaking specifically of a marijuana drug deal on a large scale, who is it probably more dangerous for, the guy supplying the drugs or the guy exchanging the money? I'm thinking this comes down to a supply and demand situation.
Okay.
And also, are you aware that I think an ex-female cop was supposed to appear in court today for delivering a certain amount of pounds to an informant, and she was relieved of duty, and I didn't hear how the outcome came on her.
Where was this?
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Two questions there. The first one, who's in more danger in a major transaction? I'd say both sides. There's only been one real thorough study of drug-related crimes that's been done in this country, and it focused in New York. And something like 90% of all drug-related crimes, other than alcohol driving incidents, involve the economics of drug transactions. In other words, buyer-seller shootouts. None of it can be directly attributable to the effect of the drugs on users. As for a local cop being faced with charges for participating, welcome to the world of prohibition. In 1999, the keynote speaker to the American Association of Police Chiefs said that police corruption was the most important problem facing police forces today. Between 1920 and 1930, over a third of the Bureau of Prohibition was fired or sent to jail for corruption. Between 1930 and 1960, the Federal Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs lost over 30% of its agents twice because of corruption. If you track stories in the newspapers, I follow this, and I would say across the United States as a whole, there are at least an average of 2 to 3 stories a day of police getting involved as parties to drug deals, either as suppliers or more typically providing escorts and armed guards to the dealers. You cannot have a prohibition law without corrupting law enforcement and the
Drug Reform Coordination Network, DRC-Net, they have a newsletter. It's fantastic. I think every week. They have a section every week called their Corrupt Cop Story. And lately, I tell you, it's grown from 1 to 2 or 3 corrupt cop stories a week, and that's probably just what they can fit into their section. But yeah, drcnet.org. Looks like we've got a caller. Okay. Hi, you're on the air.
How you guys doing?
Good.
Good to hear. I just want to ask a few questions. First off, one of you guys up there got some bud?
No.
I'm just joking. On the serious side. My name's Ruben Garcia.
Hello, Ruben.
With the elections going on and definitely about to have a presidential change, not just for the next 4-year tenure or maybe the next 8 years, to our criminal justice system, with it being so overcrowded and with the way unemployment starting to rise again, maybe not, say, here in the Houston area, but all around Texas. When Bush's first 4 years that he was in office, that was one of the first things he did, was built in a lot of prisons. Obviously, we got the biggest prison system in the Western world being here in Texas. With him leaving out and so much federal funding going towards our prison system, do you see our street, maybe here in the next 8-12 years, do you see our streets getting overcrowded again, with maybe taking a step back towards the 80s? I don't know if y'all guys remember how it was back then.
No. Okay, thanks for the question.
I think one unfortunate thing that we will see, that as economic conditions get worse, as more people lose their jobs, as more people find themselves in serious credit trouble, that there will be an increase in property crimes and probably in the so-called victimless crimes like prostitution and drug dealing, because frankly those are good alternative ways to make money. You know, one of the saddest things that happened in this country was that Reagan came along and convinced people that crimes didn't have causes, crimes just had bad people. And the only way you can have any effect on crime and the criminal justice system is to keep asking the question, why do people commit crimes?
Right, I agree.
But our police departments have gotten out of our controls. We used to be able to vote on budgets. We don't get to do this anymore. Our controls are gone.
I think we have another call. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Yes, if for instance the politicians decided to legalize marijuana, say next week or next month, would the government have a hand in being a distributor, or would you say that most users would probably grow their own?
Let me answer that personally. In my whole life, I have tried to grow one pot plant, and it died miserably. So if I had to count on myself to grow any kind of plant or medicine or food, I'd be totally out of luck. Now, the main thing we can do here is look at what happened when Prohibition was repealed and they left alcohol sales to the states. And across the 50 states, we have every variation from a few states that only allow alcohol to be sold through state-owned and operated liquor stores. Mm-hmm. We have others that limit the number of licenses to so many per 100,000 population or to so many in a town of a certain size. We've got 50 different schemes and they're all different. Mm-hmm. And the same thing, I think, quite logically could happen with something like marijuana.
Oakland has done that. Yeah. They've cut it down to 4 dispensaries for the city.
Yeah.
Well, it looks like we have to go to break, so okay. Let's just continue this discussion after this break.
Okay.
To take time for the things you really enjoy? Positiva can help bring back the pleasure of activities you used to love. Some of the highlights of Positiva may include increased appetite, lower blood pressure, and significantly lower stress. People who take Positiva discover a whole new outlook on life. Positiva may not be right for everyone. Consult your physician today. Positiva. Now you have a choice, a positive choice. For more information, visit us online at www.normal.org.
You're watching Drugs, Crime, and Politics. Using media source.
Okay, we're back. And we've, among other things, been kind of speculating about the issues of legality and what kind of reform might be possible over the next couple of years.
You know, it's interesting. One of the callers called in and said, oh, we've got all this change going on. What's going to happen in the next couple of years? Well, you know, nothing's going to happen overnight. In fact, there is legislation still. I keep on commenting about Bob Barr and how he switched sides. He used to be a huge drug warrior and proponent of the war on drugs, and now he's the libertarian presidential candidate.
I think.
But okay, we can go back to that because that's one of the most astounding news stories in a while. But his he had the Barr Amendment, which banned in Washington, D.C.
Even having a vote on medical marijuana.
Exactly, even though it's a ballot initiative state district. And even though he is now fully for ending the war on drugs and for medical marijuana, he still can't, you can't change that law. It is still having effect in D.C. So, even the law that he made, that he opposes now, can't be overturned. We're not going to have this overnight.
Let's don't be so cynical about overnight change. I want to keep going back again to alcohol prohibition. Roosevelt was elected on a repeal prohibition platform in November of 1932. By December of 1932, in other words, within a month and a half, the old outgoing lame duck Republican Congress had passed a repeal prohibition constitutional amendment, set up the mechanism that the states were to use conventions, not legislatures, to look at it. The states had all called their conventions, And the Repeal Prohibition Amendment was ratified before the end of December 1932. The first legal beer hit the streets in March of 1933. Now, that's even faster than overnight.
Well, it wouldn't take long. What does it take? From a seed to finished product, 3.5 months?
Yeah.
People could do it in 3.5 months.
Yeah.
That's pretty damn fast.
Any fairly business-minded person could get a dispensary up and running like that.
Well, I don't know about Texas and dispensaries. I would hope that they would have them. It is the reasonable thing to do. You have a central area that is distributing. You have a way of checking on tax.
My own personal preference there, of course, is let CVS and Walgreens handle it. Sure. That you don't really need a separate system. Yeah.
Because it's essentially that, a prescription, of course.
Yeah.
But, you know, if big business gets into it, it's going to get so regulated up that the young person that wants to do it for themselves will have more trouble to do it if big business gets into it. I think California had the right idea by keeping it small. The ability to grow, to supply dispensaries, it's limited. Each area has a different...
Well, you know, once again, I'm not that worried, because let's look at our current scare of tomatoes. What's one of the few places today that you can go and buy fresh tomatoes and not worry about it? Your local farmer's market.
Yes.
And what we're finding is that even in something as dominated by the big monopolist as the grocery business, with the Safeways and A&Ps, that locals, farmers markets are viable and growing across the country. Hobby gardenists are everywhere, widespread. We see community gardens of one kind or another.
Houston's especially good about farmers markets and community.
My feeling on all of this is, let's open the doors and see what happens.
Definitely. I think New Mexico, their medical marijuana state law, I don't know if they're still working out the kinks, but it's...
Nothing has happened.
Nothing has happened.
Well, so a former Students for Sensible Drug Policy person and a college friend is actually working on their campaign, and they're debating that it should be, instead of dispensaries, they're going to have individual growers that are allocated for patients.
Yeah.
So I guess essentially like a dispensary, but an individual instead of a group.
What the states since California have faced is the intractable problem of keeping the feds out of the distribution chain. And Nevada tried one approach where they were going to require the state itself to set up growth operations and dispensaries. One early version of the New Mexico law would have had state employees directly handling the distribution. The proposed amendments to the Rhode Island bill this year would set, but one of the real problems here is I don't really think a legislature is going to tell a state employee, you must violate the federal law and be in jeopardy of going to federal prison to work for the state.
No, they won't.
And as I say, what's got to happen here is that the sheer weight and inertia of the state programs just so thoroughly overwhelms the feds that the feds give up.
It's 24% of the states.
Yeah.
Right now.
Yeah, I think it's much higher than that in terms of population.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
But,
Oh, we've got 5 minutes left.
Okay.
Let's get a break.
It's going to become so overwhelming, even for small localities. It's everywhere.
Yeah. Well, we're about to run out of time. Tonight, I want to get into a much more unpleasant side of the drug war, to give you something to think about. We have been inundated lately with the stories about the violence along the American-Mexican border, the all-out shooting war among the Mexican cartels and the Mexican government. Everyone's willing to blame it on the American drug trade, but no one is looking at the issue of money. The American drug trade puts well over 20 billion, that's with a B, dollars a year into the Mexican economy. Now, this is 20 billion generated from sales of commodities which, if priced according to how much it costs to produce them, should all be dirt cheap. I mean, people have laughed at me when I've talked about $1 an ounce marijuana, but that's probably really on the high side, not the $100 an ounce we talk about. And the drug law in no way has lessened either the demand for drugs or the availability of drugs. All it's done has dumped money and violence into the drug trade. Only by ending the drug war can we end the violence. Either of you have a last comment tonight?
I agree. It comes right back to tax, regulate, legalize, educate people. Nobody, I don't know, it's
I mean, it's like, you can sum it up, you can hope for the best, you can vote for change, but definitely the real change is going to come from you and talking to your legislators, calling them, and keeping up on the issues.
That's it.
And we love having your phone calls. They add an immeasurable amount to our show. But calls to us are not nearly as important as calls to those who represent you, not just in Washington, but in Austin and locally. Ask your city council why we're not using citations instead of arrests on misdemeanors, including marijuana possession. Ask your county judge why we're wasting money on pretrial detention of drug possession cases. Ask the questions and make them answer you, because ultimately, remember the three most important words in all of American history, law, and government are those first three words of the Constitution. We, the people. And it's all up to us. And
it's exactly that. MPP.org is a great organization to go to for the up-to-the-minute updates on legislation and writing letters. They have those automatic prompt emails, but the best way is if you write your own or if you call them yourself. And also Drug Policy Forum of Texas is having their upcoming meeting this Monday. I believe, yes, at Universal Unitarian Church on Main Street.
Okay.
But thank you so much for watching us.
This Monday.
This Monday. Yep. And join us again in 2 weeks, Wednesday night, 8:30. We love your phone calls.
And this year, the important word is vote.
Yes.
Thank you. And
vote.
Good night.
All right.
Okay.
You know what? There was a baseball game on.
The present policy of drug prohibition is hopeless. It is hopeless. It will never get better. Literally, victory today is being defined as slowing down the pace of defeat.
We ought to listen to science and medicine when it comes to whether marijuana or any other substance has a medical benefit.
The fact that marijuana is a less dangerous drug.
We're going full-blown into a program that has failed and failed every other time we've tried it. Please point out one success in 30 years of an eradication program that has stopped drugs from coming in this country. point out one success, because I reviewed that research and there is none.